we talk about defense, and from 1789 till 1947, the United States was officially, they used the word war, it was a Department of War. But in 47, for some reason, they changed it to defense. So that's a history lesson. And the Defense Department itself is responsible for a proliferation of violence around the world, including over 800 military bases on foreign soil. And one of the countries where you'll find a number of these bases is South Korea. And we're really fortunate tonight to have our friend Joyakgol here. He was born in Seoul, and he lives currently in Gangjang Village on Jeju Island. When he's not traveling, he's a really busy guy. He's an activist, he's a musician, he's a songwriter, and he's co-founder of an activist group called Hot Pink Dolphin, and he's a strong member of the anti-military base movement in Gangjang Village. So, Joyakgol, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm Joyakgol, and I'm from Jeju Island, South Korea. I guess a lot of people are wondering how do Korean people think about the current situation, the Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, and the first thing that I want to say is that Korean people are furious about Donald Trump making all the threats against North Korea, as if he doesn't care if a war takes place on Korean Peninsula. It's us, people like me, your friends, that's going to die instantly as soon as he press the button, and boom, the Korean Peninsula will be devastated and millions of people will die. And we are so furious because we want to live peacefully just like everyone else. And someone else is controlling our fate. We are tired of it, especially the islanders of Jeju who have been living peacefully for such a long time, 400 years, 500 years, without military presence. All of a sudden, Korean government working with the US government and large companies like Samsung, which makes a lot of weapons, announced the plan of making naval base in 2007. All Jeju people didn't like it because just before that, Korean government announced Jeju Island as the island of world peace. So actually most Jeju people love that idea. The island of pristine nature and world peace. Yeah, that's the vision that we should continue. And now all of a sudden, Korean government announced that plan, and people didn't understand why. And at the time, U.S. and China arms race for dominance and hegemony in the region became like serious, and Jeju Islanders fell victim of that conflicts. And so we started fighting against this construction of a huge naval base peacefully. Non-violent direct action was Jeju people and Gangjang villagers used for 10 years. Every day what we do is to try to block the gate of the construction site. Now it's the Navy base main gate to stop those construction vehicles from going in and out of the construction site. And the oppression from the Korean government was incredible. The construction began in 2011, and a lot of peace activists like me went down to Jeju Island to join the villagers' peace struggle. The South Korean government sent police, hundreds of them, and sometimes thousands of them, stay in the village. And so the police would either remove us or arrest us or beat us and do all the horrible things so that we cannot block the entrance of the gate. And the Jeju people didn't give up. It went on and went on. So far, 700 people were arrested, and like many of them were in prison for a long time. And the fine that we had to pay was like $400,000 altogether. And now the construction is over. The Korean People's government said that the Navy base will be used by the Korean Navy, but after the completion of the Jeju Navy base, the U.S. is sending its warships there 6 times. And right now, what is going on in Korea is that U.S. and South Korean navies do these military exercises in Korean waters. So it's very scary. Aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, all the missiles. It's against our will to see all those harms. So Jeju people have been fighting against this project peacefully for 10 years, and this yellow flag, no naval base, is still, you can hear this at the entrance of the Navy base every day. And not only we say no Navy base, but we also say that no U.S. warships to Jeju Island. Zumwalt, made in BIW, is coming to Jeju Island. It's a matter of time, because the U.S. wants that and South Korea loves that. Why? Because it's a very expensive and high-tech weapon, and if the U.S. sends it for free, the South Korean government will love it with open arms. But what are the consequences of that? Actually, Jeju people feel like horror. So we don't want to see missiles, or we don't want to see those warships on the island of peace. And the warmongering exercises of military should stop. That's what we want to say to Donald Trump and other big country leaders in the region.
Thank you. And the possibility of fundamental change seem accessible and seem possible. So thanks for being here, Leslie.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you all for being with us this evening. You will recognize, I'm sure, these prescient words. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. The prophet was, of course, not Isaiah, not Yeshua ben Yosef of Nazareth. It was Dwight David Eisenhower, former general and at that time President of the United States of America, the man who really warned us very effectively and powerfully about the power of the military-industrial complex. Empire, my friends, is expensive. It costs lives, it costs money, and it costs souls. And right now, our nation is committed, as empires were before it, to pay those prices. And it seems like in empires past, people are satisfied with their bread and circuses or their beer and football and are happy to allow it to happen as long as middle-class American kids aren't being conscripted into the military and any longer. But that is in fact not the real truth about ourselves, our witness, or our communities. Maine is dependent upon our politicians successfully bringing defense jobs and defense contracts into our state. 10% of our gross domestic product in the state of Maine is reliant on military contracts. And we're not only talking about the $400 million annually paid to the workers at Bath Iron Works. We're also talking about Martins Point Health Care Center, because they have a contract for retiree health care and family health care. We can talk about Pratt Whitney, but we can also talk about the vendors who supply apparel and shoes for military contracting. So we are very much caught up in this web. The only other state that has as large a dependence on military contracting as Maine currently is Virginia, which is the home of the Pentagon. So when we start unraveling these pieces, we're looking at our community's sustainability. When we start talking about the hundreds of billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse that occurs at the Pentagon and with defense contractors, we're talking about economic livelihood and health care and education. It's not that we lack the resources to provide everything that we want to see provided for all of our citizens and residents in this country. It is, quite frankly, that we have, up till now, lacked the political will to talk about and redistribute the allocation of those resources. And what does it take to build a popular movement, to really delve into the issues around military spending? It takes public awareness and witnessing and vigiling, like the folks involved in this peace walk. It takes comprehensive legislative efforts, like the work that Friends Committee on National Legislation is doing here in Maine with its statewide advocacy team, teams of people that are learning as much as they can about the details and then bringing them to the attention of our elected representatives and our communities. And it also takes, as have popular movements in the past, it takes a commitment to do and to use every nonviolent methodology possible, possibly even including the courts. And here's one of my theories. You may have heard that the Pentagon commissioned a group of business people to come in and do a review of their spending and their resources. That business-friendly group produced a report that stated that the Pentagon wasted $125 billion, that's with a B, annually in the way it ran its programs and procurement. That report was spiked. It was spiked by the Department of Defense and the Obama administration, and it did not come into light until after last year's presidential election, when an investigative team from the Washington Post disclosed that this report existed and what its results were. Now, if we were corporate shareholders in a company whose board of directors and chief executives had perpetrated that level of fraud on us, the shareholders, we would be able to go to the courts and seek relief for those kinds of fraud and negligent and outright corruption. May I submit to you that the American public has a class action lawsuit against the Pentagon, and that what it may take is the strategy like a Brown versus Board of Education or the Loving decision 50 years ago that allowed interracial marriage. Let's use every tool in the toolbox: protest, vigils, prayer, witness, absolutely. Public education and awareness, most assuredly. Preaching from the pulpits or marching in the streets, most assuredly. But let's take the courts into consideration. We may never get anywhere, but the fact of the matter is, we can try. It's our right, and in fact, I would suggest it's our responsibility to do so. So when it comes to the budget of this country, where 25 cents of every dollar that we pay in taxes goes to current wars, and 20 to 23 cents of every dollar that we spend in taxes goes to past wars, and 1 cent of every dollar goes to peacemaking and diplomacy, we have to ask ourselves, is it right? Hell no. Is it moral? No. Is it sustainable? Are we going to continue to borrow money from China to build weapons to protect ourselves against China? No. And finally, is it inevitable? And the answer to that, my friends, is no. It is not inevitable, and it is within our power to change it. Thank you.
So I chair Friends of Mary Bay. For those of you that don't know, Mary Bay is behind me this way. It is a unique body of water in the whole wide world. It's the junction of 6 rivers that come together, the 2 largest being the Androscoggin and the Kennebec. Drains almost 40% of the state of Maine, and it goes down through a little 200-meter bedrock slot called the Chops. Many estuaries around the world, what makes this unique is that the 2 main tributaries come in opposition. The entrance egress is restrained by this gap. And so it's basically the fresh water going out that backs up to make the tides. It's tidal riverine. Geologically, it's called an inland delta. And it's the only body of water in the state of Maine that provides spawning and nursery habitat for all of the migratory or diagenous fish species in the Gulf, of which there are about a dozen. Eels, Atlantic salmon, alewives, blueback herring, striped bass, a couple kinds of sturgeon, etc. Also, the largest staging area in the fall for migratory waterfowl north of Chesapeake Bay, and the second hottest spot for bald eagle recovery in the state of Maine after Cobscook Bay, and home to about a dozen rare plants, some of which are globally rare. I was asked to talk about sort of the ecological perspective, I guess, the local ecological perspective, and I'm going to do that with a few topics relating to community conversion and climate. And those are the wetlands, toxics issues associated with BIW, dredging versus migratory fish, what kind of money, what war machine money can buy for the ecosystem, and then I want to talk about hazards of wireless proliferation in military and civil society. So quickly, I wrote a fair bit here, and I'll kind of skim down through. In order, wetlands and toxics. There's a long history of wetland fill over there. Many of you know that. Damage from the yard. A long history of toxics and abuse. Jason mentioned something that might be happening recently. I actually did call the DEP about that this morning, and I'm waiting for a call back to see just what that water was, because it wasn't clear in the permit. Would these issues be less under civilian conversion, something that we've talked about a lot? And by the way, I felt great handing out Bruce's letter, because if the president and the governor and our entire delegation could talk about conversion, then why couldn't I talk about it and bring that up to people? So, I couldn't though. Well, I did, but you know, here I am now, so, instead of doing a boat tour. So, yeah, likely there'd be less wetland destruction because further expansion of the facility is probably unlikely, although not assured. Let's say they went to building merchant ships. I like to expand the focus of the term community to include ecological community. Since we are a part of that, albeit something of an alien part much of the time, we still live and die by how we integrate with that ecological community. Certainly, oversight of toxic pollutants would increase under civilian conversion, whether the yard went to building merchant ships, rail cars, photovoltaics, wind turbines, or something else. The military, as a lot of us know, too often gets a free pass. Climate change, with increasing warmth, we're seeing higher sea levels, and actually the Gulf of Maine, I believe, is one of the highest, it's got one of the highest rates of increase of any place in the world. So increasingly severe weather events, and so our wetland values only increase because of their buffering abilities. So they're very, very valuable, not only for providing habitat for little fish, but for buffering the climatic changes that we're seeing. Dredging versus migratory fish. As mentioned, the bay and the lower Kennebec host all these great fish species in the Gulf of Maine. Some are endangered, some are threatened, some are species of concern. These are all technical sort of designations. If dredging is done according to the existing permit for the yard, at a time of year when most of these fish aren't here, the effect on the fish is minimal. It's limited. The effect is limited mostly to deposition, and whether it affects dredging, whether it affects wetlands or shellfish and lobster in some of the downstream dumping sites. Friends of Merry Meeting Bay and some other groups actually a number of years ago filed suit in federal court, and we've been in court quite a few times, over the timing of dredging. At that point, it was going to be in the summer, and we lost because of national security. What that meant, ultimately, was that that ship, which was going in and out anyway with a local pilot, even though the channel wasn't dredged, had to get to a christening in Key West for a big party in a certain amount of time, and they couldn't wait a little bit extra. So with conversion, I think it's safe to assume that even if the shipbuilding continues, the national security card is off the table. So that's a plus. Vis-a-vis climate changes, I think that and the dredging issues, hard to say, but I think we might see increased deposition as we see bigger storm events, but we'll probably also see more flushing. Might be a wash, I don't know. What will military dollars buy? There's no end to alternative beneficiaries of conversion. I know everyone in this room can think of better and more worthwhile ways to spend the money that goes into the military funding now, whether ecological, health, education, energy, jobs related. I've just got one ecological community example for you. Since 60% of our species live in riparian zones, or the zones along the rivers, which I consider analogous to our arteries, and I consider migratory fish to be analogous to the oxygen in our blood. Behind me is the head of tide up the Androscoggin River here. Most of you know where that is, between Brunswick and Topsham and the bridge. And the dam there, there's a fishway there, which for all its faults is a pretty good-sized fishway. One of the Zumwalt ships over there with no windows in it could fund about 1,150 of those fishways. That's a lot of fishways. And I heard on the radio just coming here that the regular Aegis, models they normally build cost about a quarter of that. So you could figure that, and they're planning to build some that are even more expensive. So that's a lot of fishery restoration, which is sort of where our focus is.
5 minutes.
Okay. One story here. A number of years ago, a dam came out, the Fort Halifax Dam, which is was at the bottom of the Sebasticook River, comes into the Kennebec near Waterville. And it's been a few years now, been about 8 years, and the alewives, which are little river herring, have come back into the river. And there's now 10 miles of Sebasticook up to the first dam, which is called Benton Falls. Everyone loves to eat alewives. That's probably about their purpose in life. And blueback herring as well, both river herring. They're now passing about 3.5 million alewives over the Benton Falls Dam in a fish elevator. And the word has gotten out that that restaurant is open. And I fly eagle surveys every year, nest surveys, and we've got up there, and this year we flew in 80 eagles up there. And it's just incredible to see that kind of abundance in our natural world. It's like, oh, there's Alaska right here in Maine, you know? And not only the eagles, but everyone here has probably seen eagles chase osprey and they drop the fish, you know, perfect national bird, right? So, but up there's food for everybody. And the ospreys are eating and the eagles are eating and they don't bother each other. I called the guy who runs that fishway a couple of years ago, and while he's on the phone with me, hanging out on top of the dam, he's watching striped bass come up there. This is like 60 miles up from the ocean, chasing alewives into the shallows. Alewife gets in the shallow, gets away from the striped bass, think they've got it made, and a great blue heron is there and stabs the alewife. And then there are juvenile seals up there that are catching and releasing alewives, learning how to fish. So it's a really beautiful thing. Last point, hazards of wireless. I'm a science kind of guy. In my 50 years or so of doing environmental work, I consider radio frequency radiation from wireless proliferation the greatest toxic threat of our time. Kind of like, Rachel Carson and the pesticides, Silent Spring. Not necessarily because of its acute nature, but because of its spatial and temporal nature. It is everywhere and it's 24/7. And at our electron and proton cellular core, we are charged particles, okay? We are beings of frequency. The odd thing is not that many people are reacting badly to man-made EMF exposure, electromagnetic frequencies. The odd thing, the crazy thing would be if not having co-evolved with those frequencies, we are not affected, and we are being affected. Imagine what your response would be if you could see this ever-increasing toxic soup of really carcinogenic EMF waves. The two main problems are non-cancer effects and cancer. Many studies cite a range of 3 to 13% of exposed populations as currently electrohypersensitive. Some studies suggest 30% because many people don't understand the cause of their symptoms, and they're very varied. The National Toxicology Program of the NIH found a whole body exposure to low-level radio frequency radiation like that emitted by cell phones and smart meters causes brain and heart tumors in rats. Proliferation is harming not only people in an ever-increasing population of electrosensitives, and we're all susceptible, but wildlife and plants as well. So our military has played a large and often lead role in the development of wireless issues, from early radar use to current electromagnetic pulse weapons that are being used on citizen protesters around the country and around the world. Radar sickness, aka microwave sickness, aka electromagnetic hypersensitivity, all variations of the same problem. I've not actually measured effects of the microwave intensity at General Dynamics, but with the increasing electronic sophistication of today's military, I'd expect some improvement with a conversion, civilian conversion. Any reduction in microwave emissions has obvious benefits to the community, and there are also theories on how the increase in radio frequency radiation is a factor in atmospheric warming, although I'm a bit skeptical of some of those. You should also know that there are massive efforts to deploy various atmospheric platforms, enabling wireless access worldwide. Not going to be able to get away from it. These are via balloons, drones, and many, many thousands of satellites, the launching and maintenance of which is without question contributing to global warming because of the rocket emission exhaust ingredients. Interested in that some more, check out the Global Union Against Radiation Deployment from Space, or GARDS. Website is stopglobalwifi.org, or the research section of our Maine Coalition to Stop Smart Meter site There are some little cards on the back left table that talk about some hints for radiation safety and have the websites on them. So from the perspectives of the community and you know, climate, very little doubt in my mind that peacetime conversion would be a step in the right direction. All right, so thank you.
Thanks. Next is Mary Beth Sullivan, and I was looking at the website, the General Dynamics website, because I wanted to see, well, do they make anything that is not for war? And the short answer, as far as I can tell, is no, because they've got a combat systems division, they've got a marine division, and the icons for those are a tank and a nuclear submarine. Then there is an information service and technology division, and that seems to be about spy and surveillance stuff. And then I saw aerospace, maybe. So I looked at that, and hey, they do. The division of that corporation that doesn't make war, weapons for war, makes what they now call business jets. But the last time I looked at the website, maybe in August, those were called executive jets. So I think that must not have been ringing true with some kind of people who were listening. So basically what that means is that the only part of the company that's not making weapons, the only people who can afford anything that's made by that part of the company are the people who are reaping amazing amounts of profits from selling weapons. It's all very absurd and overwhelming, I think. But Mary Beth, many of us know her as a social worker and an activist, but she has also published or written or co-written at least 2 books, because I've seen them in the attic buried. I don't know if that's a former life, but she can speak really well about conversion away from the militarized economy, and really convincingly too, so we're really glad to have her here.
Thank you, Jason. So it is true, and many lives ago, I wrote I co-authored with some friends, some books for children, but that's another story.
It still counts, though.
It still counts. There you go. Okay, I have the pleasure of kind of bringing this together to talk about conversion. And so some of what you're going to hear is repetitive, and I think that's a good thing, right? What I want to offer first and foremost is the vision. And what I love, you see up on your TV screen now the image of the Maine Peace Walk for this year. And what I greatly appreciated, last Sunday, we sat in a circle in my church, my local church, the neighborhood UCC church in Bath. And I feel like I've occasionally talked about conversion within that community, but what I heard in that circle with this incredible enthusiasm, a description of what conversion would look like, really based on Russell Ray's image. That image made its way through Bath, has been making its way through Bath for many, many days now, and it really is capturing the imagination of what we mean when we talk about conversion. The vision that I'm offering to the community here is the vision of the people leading a movement that loosens the grip of the permanent war economy that we live under. What this image offers us is the people demanding that we focus on building a 21st century sustainable energy infrastructure. An image that understands that global climate change is the catastrophe of our century. And it's time that we demand to abolish war. War is our dinosaur. War is destroying the planet. Our dependence on oil, our fighting to gain control of oil and other resources in the Earth's environment is destroying life as we know it. So, it's up to us to sort of demand another way. One of the, I want to now turn to the topic of jobs. My very favorite thing, when I first started dating Bruce Gagnon 100 years ago, I would listen to him talk to a group of people and he would say, "Friends, what is the #1 industrial export product of the United States?" And the answer would be weapons. Weapons is the #1 industrial export. And then he would say, "If weapons is your #1 industrial export, what is your global marketing strategy?"
War.
Exactly. And so for years also, the good news is that there's been research that we have been reliant on. The Political Economic Research Institute at UMass and Amherst has for years done and then redone the research that identifies the Pentagon as the lowest job creator by the numbers. And I can tell you, if you want to read a very simple 4-page article, Heidi Garrett Peltier, she's the co-author of these studies. Brown University has a Watson Institute that is examining the costs of war. So there's a 4-page article on the Brown University's website that tells us this. Fundamentally, Heidi tells us this. For each $1 billion, the Pentagon spends 11,200 military-related jobs can be created. Take that same $1 billion and you can generate 16,800 jobs in clean energy. That's a 50% increase. You can almost double the jobs if you spend that money on education or healthcare or other things. But if you're looking at industry, if you're looking at an industrial base, we are so tied to the weapons industry. The only way to loosen and change things up a little bit is to take some of that money back. Heidi estimates military spending by the federal government in the United States. We've spent $2.9 trillion since 2001, just with the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. $2.9 trillion, and this article was written a couple of years ago. That means the US is spending an average of $109 billion a year on those 2 wars alone. The net job creation could have been 1 to 2 million more jobs if the US had not been at war. All right? Sort of piggybacking on the information we just got from Leslie. So what do the people do about it? The people speak with clarity. We want to abolish war. What? Slavery was once at the center of the economic, political, and social fabric of our nation. We look back at the abolitionists as the heroes of our time. I invite each of you to stand strong to the idea of abolishing war. It has to be a people's movement. War is too lucrative to the elite political class to engage such a conversation. But it must be done. And it's not just Donald Trump. Remember, drone technology and drone killing accelerated under Obama's presidency. Did you know that he had a kill list? I read an article that said, where he commented about himself, who knew that I would get so good at killing? That I would be so good at killing? Under the Obama administration, the decision was made to upgrade our nuclear weapons stockpile to the tune of $1 trillion over a 10-year period. The 2016 article I read wondered aloud why this issue never made it to the presidential campaign trail. Do you remember this being debated? Not even in Congress, not in the newspapers. Why do you feel, how do you feel about being excluded from that conversation? $1 trillion to upgrade the nuclear weapons that we have currently. Why was that not debated? Because they all agree. They've got nothing to disagree about, right? Finally, I want to just go. We could talk forever about the chaos of the Pentagon, but I think it's important for us to understand where the future of war is going. The United States has an AFRICOM, or the African Command. I read a parenthetical statement in Time magazine. The Time magazine article was empathizing. Yeah, it's a little bit hard for Donald Trump. It's hard to be in charge of so much war, right? AFRICOM is managing 129 special operations a day. Did you know that? This is a parenthetical phrase. Are they assuming that we already know that? Right? Do we know that 129 special operations a day? What the heck does that mean on the continent of Africa? I can tell you what it means. Africa has the resources we need to build our smartphones and our computers and all the rest, and we're going to be competing with China in that continent if we're not already, and that's the future of war in this country. It's madness. Our clarity, your clarity, global climate change is the problem of this century. Let's break our dependence on oil. Let's create a world here in our own country. Let's create a world here in our own country that understands the real safety concern for the entire planet is global climate change. So let's make that our priority. Let us demand that that is the issue that we as a nation engage. We talk about conversion. We talk about the idea of taking these factories that are building weapon systems and building something else. And people for years have looked at us and said, that's so crazy, how could that happen? Let me take us back to World War II. We weren't ready for World War II. We didn't have the equipment and the materials that we needed. Franklin Delano Roosevelt took over the industrial base of the country, and he said, we are going to build for war. Whatever you're making, if you're making silk underwear right now, you're going to be making parachutes for the war effort. If you're making lipsticks, you're going to be building bomb casings for the war effort, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Remember the old days when we actually made consumer products, right? It could happen again. I'm not saying that we should give Donald Trump the authority to rewire all the industry in our country, but the fact of the matter is we need leadership around this. It's not going to come from the political class. It has to come from us. So I'm out of time, but I want to go back to the quote that Leslie gave. I have it too, and I want to expand on the quote that she offered because I think the whole quote is worth hearing. Again, this was the general running the country of the United States in the 1950s, who says to us, every gun that is made, every warship that is launched, every rocket that is fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. Imagine that clarity how many years ago, 63 years ago. It's 2 electric power plants. It's 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It's some 50 miles of concrete highway. We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people. This, I repeat, is the best way of life to be found on the road the world has been taking, says General Eisenhower. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. That clarity existed 63 years ago. Conversion occurred before that. It is a vision. We've got to hold it. We have to pray for it. We have to bring it with life and with love and with clarity to the world we live in. We can abolish war and we can solve the problem of our time, which is global climate change. We can do it. We must do it if we're going to survive the 21st century. So thank you all for listening, and I urge you to come and keep this conversation alive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Google the Peace Report. Become a subscriber to the Peace Report. Will Griffin is someone who understands far too painfully the realities of war, and he has a way of communicating through short videos, the truths of our time. Pay attention, and the truth that speaks to you, forward it, share it, pay attention to it, and spread it around. he's a good example of the people were always, look at the gray hairs in here are always saying, what's the younger generation? We need them. Well, they're there and they're doing it, and he's doing a beautiful job of it. And it's our job to kind of hold that up and spread his message out there in the world, because his message is our message. It's the next generation. It's time to pass the baton on to him and share that. The Peace Report. ThePeaceReport.com.
There he is.
Okay. My name is Will Griffin. I am an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran. I created the Peace Report roughly a year ago, 13 months ago, and on Facebook I've gotten over 25 million views since then. So there's an audience out there. I don't know what they're waiting for, but maybe it starts with a video that has links to other information that they can link up to. And what I really want the Peace Report to be is the news source for the anti-war movement. So I want to highlight not just Veterans for Peace, but I want to highlight what you all are doing here in Maine and the struggle that you're fighting against for this conversion of BIW, and what's going on in San Diego when they're fighting against the largest military air show in the world, and what's going on the local level, everywhere across this country, because I think there's so many great things going on, and we're all fighting the same fight, right? We're all fighting the same struggle. So that's what I try to do, and I try to let the whole world see what's going on. And I just made a video with the protest we did here in front of BIW, and so yeah, I'm trying.
How many hits does it have so far?
It's got about 8,000 views right now. So it's all right.
So the other 63% of the American public has a Facebook account. So for those of us who resist this kind of digital media, it's important to remember that 2 out of 3 Americans rely on this for information as well as for connectivity.
So the other thing I want to highlight about the Peace Report, but also Bruce Gagman's blog, Organizing Notes, that what both of these gentlemen are doing is bringing the whole world to us. Jeju Island is alive through the videos. Joyakgol and his community do brilliant videos that then get just kind of distributed through the world, and those sites bring it to us. And there is, if you ever feel any sense of despair about what we're doing, to tune into what's happening on Jeju Island and see the life and the vigor and the energy and the music and the love that is manifest in the way they are demonstrating and resisting the powers that be. It's energizing, and it gives me the motivation to keep hanging on. So kudos to Jeju Island and that community.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Will Griffin. I am an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran. I created the Peace Report roughly a year ago, 13 months ago, and on Facebook I've gotten over 25 million views since then. So there's an audience out there. I don't know what they're waiting for, but maybe it starts with a video that has links to other information that they can link up to. And what I really want the Peace Report to be is the news source for the anti-war movement. So I want to highlight not just Veterans for Peace, but I want to highlight what you all are doing here in Maine and the struggle that you're fighting against for this conversion of BIW, and what's going on in San Diego when they're fighting against the largest military air show in the world, and what's going on the local level, everywhere across this country, because I think there's so many great things going on, and we're all fighting the same fight, right? We're all fighting the same struggle. So that's what I try to do, and I try to let the whole world see what's going on. And I just made a video with the protest we did here in front of BIW, and so yeah, I'm trying.
How many hits does it have so far?
It's got about 8,000 views right now. So.
The Republicans have snuck into the budget a provision for opening up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to oil and gas exploration. I don't know if you're familiar with that piece of the northern Arctic continent, but it's a relatively small portion of the coastline, and it has been protected, and it is the ancestral home of an indigenous group called the Gwich'in. And they, like the Plains Indians who are so intimately dependent upon the buffalo, have existed for millennia with a relationship with the caribou. So if you could, between now, and the 24th, just call Susan Collins. And she is unique in that she's one of the few Republicans that occasionally sort of steps out of line and acts independently. The Democrats have no say in this because the Republicans can pass, but they don't need a single Democrat. Just call Susan Collins and leave word with her office that you want her to vote no on the budget, that you want her to protect the Arctic refuge. It's one of the most pristine, intact, unchanged environmental parts of our national heritage that we still have. And it's our land, it's a refuge, it's federal refuge in our name. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Thank you.
Annie Skink either is or was a part of a group called the Arctic Council that I think of as the Arctic Chamber of Commerce, but others have called the Arctic War Council. So it's interesting to me that we have a shipyard here that if it got converted, what if it got converted to ice-breaking ships, which people are drooling over that possibility because, the U.S. has like a tiny number of ice-breaking ships, but other Arctic nations have all these, a lot more ice-breaking ships. So it's like this big competition.
There's no more ice, though.
Yeah, who's gonna get up there in the season when there is ice? While that happens, who's gonna get up there and destroy it quicker? We need to be building more ships so we can be destroying it quicker. Absolutely. Okay, great. Who else?
I have another announcement. In this church, a week from today, we will be hosting mini groups, including the groups that are here tonight. We'll be hosting a movie called Habakusha, Our Right to Live, and it's about a Japanese, Korean, and American survivors of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so the filmmaker will be here to talk to us about the film and be asking, you can ask questions afterwards. I understand it's a wonderful film, a very depressing film, but a very wonderful film to see. And it's about a journey of a very young child, Yoko, and her music teacher, a survivor of Hiroshima bombing. And the young child's journey is paralleled by that of David, an American boy who learns of the bombing through Hollywood movies and World War II propaganda. So it's a film that's, I think, very, very important to see, and we hope to see you all here. Thanks. Can I take it?
I'm Susan, I live in Bath. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for what you are doing, what we all are doing in our own way. And it fills me with so much love and emotion that I actually cannot almost contain it, but I so appreciate all your efforts.
About done. So I just want to point out what other people have pointed out is that it really matters that we're here, and we all know so many people who are indifferent and or resigned. We were vigiling last week down at that General Dynamics facility, and this guy pulled up in his truck who works there, and I would say he was very angry, and he had an animated conversation with one of the people who was standing there with us, and you might call it yelling, and what really came across was, one, anger, and two, the resignation. They're never gonna, and it's true, they are never gonna, but we're gonna, and sometimes it's as simple as coming to a place, eating some delicious and nutritious food with great people, listening to some interesting people, and then stacking the chairs in piles of 10 on either side. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you again, panelists, and see you next time.